quorum with those who are online and in the room. So welcome to committee, everybody. Can I get a thumbs up from somebody online if you can hear me? All right, fantastic. Thank you. All right, so today we are going to have a hearing on HCR 5015. We will go to an overview from our reviser at this time. So Chair recognizes reviser.
Mr. Chairman, I'll do the overview of this. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. HCR 5015 is a concurrent resolution urging the United States Congress to reject legislation that would federalize elections in the United States, known as the For the People Act of 2021. The resolution has a number of descriptions of what the For the People Act proposes to do. On page 2 of the resolution is the actual resolution, which states that state legislatures should have the freedom and flexibility to determine the best practices that meet the needs of their states in terms of changes to the election process, and that should be left to the states. It is a concurrent resolution, Mr. Chairman, and so therefore it would go over to the Senate if adopted by the House. That I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Reviser Long. Committee, are there any questions about the resolution for the reviser? I am seeing none. Thank you, Reviser Long. All right, so the chair is now going to open up the proponents section of the bill or of the resolution, and the chair recognizes Katie Capal, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, Communications and Policy.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Thank you for the opportunity to offer comments on HR 1 and the resolution before you today, HCR 5015. HR 1 is a very large bill. Our office continues to review and have conversations with our colleagues in other states and with the National Association of Secretaries of State, and of course with the Kansas federal delegation about the bill. We have also met with majority and minority staff in the U.S. Senate, and one thing has certainly become apparent in all of this is that election officials, red, blue, or purple, were not involved with the drafting of this legislation. The House of Representatives did pass HR 1 last week. We anticipate the Senate will introduce their version of the bill next week, S1, with plans for a markup in April. Should some variation of this legislation pass, it will be a substantial election policy change, and our office argues it could be bigger than the Help America Vote Act or the National Voter Registration Act. We have multiple questions and concerns with the implications of HR 1, but my comments today are focused on the election administration provisions of the bill. There are 3 key points with HR 1. First, it impedes upon states' rights by federalizing election administration. It interferes with state statutes governing election administration, and it includes several mandates that are either impossible to meet, contradict existing law, or rely on expensive or non-existent technology. It's important to note that several provisions of HR 1 require compliance by January 2022. That's only 9 short months away, and that leaves states little time to realistically comply with proponents of the bill and gives state legislatures very little opportunity to address funding or policy implications resulting from passage of HR 1. It is also important to note that there is currently no funding available with HR 1 to assist state and local jurisdictions with implementing the mandates required under the bill. I'm going to dive in a little deeper to talk about the information sharing component of HR 1. It would expand the number of state and federal agencies required to capture and share information with election officials within 6 months of enactment of HR 1 or similar legislation. We have concerns about the ability to securely transfer that information from one ability to another, and even more basic concerns about whether or not the systems between the federal government and election officials, or even state government and election officials, are even compatible. In all likelihood, with the new information sharing provisions contained in HR 1, state and federal agencies will in all likelihood need to either update or create new systems, forms, and security protocols to ensure compliance with HR 1. There have also been serious legality questions raised on information sharing, and there are several state and federal laws that prohibit information sharing, and those will likely need to be changed to ensure compliance with HR 1. In addition, there are several technology changes required under HR 1. The first is that it appears to require electronic poll books and internet connectivity at every polling location in Kansas. That might sound great, but the bill does not provide any resources, security requirements, or other critical information that gives local election officials guidance to ensure that elections and voter data are not compromised. Additionally, states are required to have an online voter registration system, which again doesn't sound bad. 39 states do have similar systems, but HR 1 would require states to have an automated telephone-based system that provides the same services as the online registration system. NAS, which is the National Association of Secretaries of State, has had several conversations with election technology vendors, and as of today, they do not believe technology to provide this sort of automated telephone system exists on the current marketplace. Finally, I'll touch upon some contradictions in HR 1 with existing state and or federal law. HAVA and Kansas law requires the state to verify voter information, and HR 1 does not provide any guidance for how to verify voter information that would be provided through these electronic poll books, presumably at polling locations. The bill also contradicts existing requirements specifying who has access to statewide voter registration databases and what level of access is permitted to each user, which raises serious security concerns for our office. And finally, we feel it's important to note that HR 1 prohibits voter list maintenance within 6 months of a federal election. So in closing, we do feel it is important to reiterate that Kansas just completed a successful election in 2020 where we saw record-breaking turnout even in the middle of a global pandemic. You rewind back 2 additional years to 2018, we saw record-breaking turnout for the gubernatorial election. And we feel this is evidence that our foundational election laws in Kansas are working. We feel this reaffirms that Kansas is a voter-friendly state where voters have options for how to safely and securely cast their ballot. And thanks to our dedicated local election officials, the Kansas election system has demonstrated over and over again that it's experienced and capable of handling shifts in voter preferences and dramatic increases or decreases in voter turnout. Secretary Schwab does not support HR 1 or similar legislation, and we appreciate your examination of this legislation today through the resolution before you in CR 5015. We have communicated our opposition to members of the Kansas delegation and will continue to work with our Republican and Democratic colleagues alike to convey the dramatic impact this legislation will have on our elections.
Ms. Kapal. Committee, we are going to hold questions until the end of the proponent section. So next we will go ahead and move to Representative Chris Croft of the 8th District, Kansas House of Representatives. Welcome to the Elections Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee. Thank you for the opportunity to voice my thoughts on HR 1. HR 1 seeks to protect politicians and limit the voice of American citizens by consolidating federal government control and pushing our system of government into totalitarianism. Boy, that was a hard one. I've been in 22 countries and I've seen many governments, many leaders. I've helped many of our allies establish leadership centers around the world. I've seen firsthand what a controlling government can do, what it does to crush people, to crush innovation, and to promote the elites that are in power and keep them in power. I've also seen what happens when the power is returned to the people, how they flourish, how the economy grows, how self-worth of the people grows as well. Pride in the country is promulgated. it was never more evident than the stark contrast of the two ends of that spectrum than it was in Iraq between my first combat tour as part of the initial invasion in 2003 and as part of the surge in 2007. H.R. 1 attacks states' rights by establishing a national voter registration, eliminating voter identification. And I mean, look, we need identification when we travel on airplanes. I mean, we need it when we're going to certain events. Actually, last night I needed it when I was at Chick-fil-A because I had military discount. So, you know, we have to do this for a lot of things, but yet we're saying we don't want identification when we have to vote. I mean, it just seems silly to me. I know Kansas is one of the 3 that does require voter identification, but H.R. 1 would tell us we can't do that, that the federal government is better at running our state than we are. H.R. 1 also establishes public financing for partisan political elections. The last thing I think we need in politics is to inject public financing into a highly charged and partisan environment. Utilizing public funds to bolster partisan campaigns only serves to embolden and protect politicians and limits the voice of Americans. Time and time again, H.R. 1 limits the power of state and local units of government and consolidates more power at the federal level. It limits our ability as state legislators to decide what is best interest of our state. I've served all around the world for our freedoms. I spent 30 years of my life doing that. I cannot sit back and allow freedoms to be taken away without doing something, and I ask you to join in the effort to keep our freedoms, to keep our rights. That's why I do not support H.R. 1. I do thank you for the time and the opportunity to just let you know how I feel.
Thank you, Representative. Next, we will have Elizabeth Patton, State Director, Americans for Prosperity, Kansas.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to testify in front of committee today. Again, yes, my name is Elizabeth Patton. I'm the State Director of Americans for Prosperity, Kansas, and today we are also testifying in support of HCR 5015. The previous conferees have already discussed many of the concerns that we share with HR 1, so I will endeavor not to be redundant with the committee today. But we did want to point out that the resolution highlights some of the most egregious elements of HR 1, and there are many. We appreciate the state legislature very much taking a stand against such infringements on the American people. We firmly believe that Congress should not rewrite the rules of engagement in a way that chills free speech. Americans must be free to speak, vote, and associate freely without politicians holding a veto on who gets to participate and who does not. Accountability is for the politicians, transparency is for the government, and privacy is for the people. And it is our belief that HR 1 achieves none of these. And HCR 5015 does a great job of speaking to the flagrant disregard of civil liberties within this piece of federal legislation. As you've already heard from some of the fellow conferees, members of Congress and other public officials, we agree that they have an obligation to ensure that everyone can exercise their rights, and yet they are falling desperately short with this piece of legislation in HR 1. Again, the state legislature should be the ones responsible for our election integrity and our privacy, and to strip that away, in our belief, is unconstitutional. HR 1 would just further exacerbate some of the problems in civic life, and it would close off further what many people have seen around the country as a rigged system. But again, we have not seen that as an issue here in our state. And when we see special interests team up in Washington, D.C. At the expense of everyone else in the rest of the country, we have a serious concern. HCR 5015 appropriately condemns the overreach of the federal government. As we all know, historical examples demonstrate privacy has played a vital role in achieving progress, including the unsigned Federalist Papers that helped persuade a new nation to endorse the Constitution. And unfortunately, the cancel culture that pervades our society currently threatens civil discourse, and a partisan election commission and other components of HR 1 would further decrease public confidence in not only election integrity, but in free speech. So in conclusion, foundational freedoms erode when we protect them for one set of people and not another. And that's exactly what the problem is, largely, with HR 1. We need a more vibrant civil society, not a stifled one. And we really appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of a great resolution that highlights such grievous concerns with a piece of federal legislation. I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Patton. Committee, I will point you to, can you go ahead and mute Ms. Patton? Thank you. I will go ahead and point you to written proponent testimony from Brittany Jones, Director, Advocacy for Family Policy Alliance. Committee, do you have any questions for the proponents at this time? The chair recognizes Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first, I'd like to thank you for bringing this resolution to a hearing. I think it's I get so many emails and messages from my constituents about this, and I'm glad that we're having the opportunity to talk about HR 1. My questions, I've got about 1 million questions about HR 1, but I'm going to try to contain myself and just ask one or two. My first question's for Ms. Kapal. So in this committee, when we're considering different pieces of legislation that would make changes to our election law, the two most frequently heard phrases from opponents are quoting the Secretary of State, who said that we had no widespread irregularities in our election, and that whatever piece of legislation we're considering is a solution in search of a problem. So since we had such a good election without irregularities, and we're told by the national media that this was the most secure election in history, is HR 1 a solution in search of a problem?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Representative Proctor, we can only speak to what we experienced in Kansas, and we continue to be very pleased with how the 2020 elections go. We feel that for Kansas specifically, HR 1 is a solution in search of a problem. Again, the Kansas elections went very well. There's always room for improvement, but we did experience record-breaking turnout in the middle of a global pandemic. And then just to take a step back and appear even more globally, is Kansas is a long-held local control state, and should HR 1 or legislation similar to it be enacted, it would erode the ability of Kansas and other states to control our own elections, and we are very opposed to that. We may not be perfect, but we have a long-held history and executing safe, secure, and trustworthy elections, and this would erode those capabilities.
Mr. Chair, thank you. If I could ask just one more question, I promise this is the last one. We're frequently told by the national media that it is impossible to hack American elections because we have so many different systems in each state and county, and that we're not, connected to the internet. Standardizing elections across the entire United States and forcing every polling place to connect to the internet, does that not make elections less secure?
Thank you, Representative Proctor. Secretary Schwab is on record of saying part of the reason why he believes election interference by domestic and foreign bad actors has not been as impactful as to what it could have been is because each state has their own election systems, they have their own election laws, and that works to our benefit in making sure our elections are safe and secure.
Chair now recognizes Representative Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question's for the representative from AFP. Do you know, is there much resistance to HR 1 in the other states, or is it just a few movement in just a few states, or just wondering where we stand on that?
Sure. So we are a national organization, and we have 35 state chapters, and I'm aware of activity in all of our state chapters where there are many concerns across the spectrum, really honestly in a bipartisan fashion, with concerns to HR 1. Actually, the last time this was introduced, the ACLU opposed HR 1 back in 2019 and 2020, although I can't speak for them, but they have come out in opposition before when this didn't move because there wasn't the opportunity for it to do so in the way that it has right now in this Congress. So my point in that is saying there is widespread concern with the contents of this legislation, not just limited to AFP or the activists here in the state.
All right. And I just, well, something I always learned in high school and college, and something I've told people when they ask me about it is that, for instance, the presidential election is not one election. It's actually 50 different elections in each state. And this, to me, sounds like if it went through, would be a step closer to a national election, which I don't think would be a good idea.
Correct. There is a lot of federalization on many fronts in this piece of legislation that are highly concerning and in a completely opposite direction from, in our perspective, how America should or ought to be moving forward with their elections and free speech, et cetera.
All right. Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Do you know how many current secretaries of state out there oppose HR 1, or is it also a bipartisan group who oppose HR 1?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Schwab joined with 15 of his fellow secretaries of state in joining just a written statement speaking out against HR 1. However, and this is me not talking for the other states, but secretaries of state of both parties have expressed concern just with the practical implications of HR 1 and the ability to do this as quickly as what the bill requires.
Thank you. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a number of questions for the conferees, but because they keep talking about the provisions of HR 1, which we don't have in front of us, and I can ask them questions, but it might be easier if I just asked one question of the revisor's office, if I could.
Proceed.
Mr. Long, could you walk us through HR 1 section by section and tell us what it provides?
Is that what HR 1 is right there?
Yeah, but I haven't had a chance to look at it. Many of these complaints about it kind of run the gamut, and I'd like to know exactly in the bill what sections they are speaking to. So if he could go through each of these sections, that would answer my question.
So you're asking the representative to go through approximately 750 pages? Is that how long the bill is?
It's only 400 when I copied it.
Well, Representative, I would encourage you to, before we work this resolution, because we're not going to work it today, to, do your homework, read up on it, read through all 400 pages, what have you. If you'd like, I'm sure Revisor Long would be more than happy to walk you through each of those sections.
I think it'd be good for the committee if he could do that.
Well, at this point in time, we're not going to have him walk us through the entire federal bill. However, I would encourage the entire committee to review the federal legislation.
Okay, and as I understand it, the bill has passed the U.S. House of Representatives already.
That is my understanding as well, and it is currently on its way to the Senate.
So if I could specifically then for the testimony of our conferees, Ms. Patton, if I could ask her a question.
Proceed.
Ms. Patton, you talked about the HR 1 being unconstitutional. Remember that testimony? What constitutional frailties does it contain?
Sure. From our perspective, there are many. And to your point, there is a lot to this bill and a lot of pieces within that that Secretary of State's office examined as well. But to our point, a lot of that lies within some of the free speech components that we believe that this touches. If it would be helpful, I do have some one-pager documents that I would be happy to drop by your office that have some additional key points on it, which I apologize I don't have with me today and did not submit with my written testimony, but I would be happy to follow up with you on those pieces.
Specifically, yes, I would like, you used two descriptions. One, you said it was unconstitutional, and then you did specifically talk about free speech difficulties. If your constitutional infirmities are limited to free speech sections, that's fine. I would like to know what sections of the bill violate the First Amendment relative to free speech, the specific sections. And secondly, if indeed it's unconstitutional, then why do we fear it? It'll be struck down, right?
And to your point, I believe it will, and I believe it will bring a large amount of litigation, which will unfortunately also cost the taxpayers quite a bit of money that would be unfortunate. We do believe that this is in violation of the First Amendment and has many other concerns as well. But I would be happy to provide you additional materials on our analysis of the bill.
Then if I could, Mr. Chairman, I would ask Secretary of State's office if spending taxpayer monies on lawsuits is a concern of the office. Do you understand the question, Ms. Copal?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. We have, at this point, we are looking at the bill before you, the HR1 and SR1, which we have not had an opportunity to look at. We have not had any conversations as to what comes next.
And lastly, Mr. Chairman, just a technical question on the drafting of the resolution. It indicates here that we're going to send a copy of this to the respective majority and minority leaders of the House and Senate, but then it says we're going to send a copy to every member, and I didn't know why we had to specify the leadership since they're all members of the respective bodies.
I believe if you read it, it says that we shall send an enrolled copies of this resolution to the President of the United States, Majority Leader, Minority Leader of the Senate, Speaker of the House, Minority Leader of the House, and each member of the United States Senate and the United States House of Representatives serving Kansas. So that'd be our Kansas delegation members, not the entire Senate and House.
And I think that's appropriate. And I had some questions for Representative Croft, but he ducked out of here as soon as he completed his testimony, so I'll take that up with him on the side. Thank you.
Yes, and I will let the body know that Representative Croft had to leave because one of his grandchildren unfortunately broke her arm while he was in here. So that is the reason why he had to step out. So I hope that you can understand him taking care of that family emergency that he felt he needed to.
Well, I have no grandkids, but I can relate. Thank you.
Fantastic. So yes, if you have any questions for Representative Croft, be sure to find him in the hallways or locate him in his office. Committee, are there any further questions for the proponents at this time? The chair recognizes Representative Dodson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is for Secretary of State's office, Ms. Copal. I know this HR1 is very poorly formed. I mean, having just read through part of it, it just seems like it's very quick onto the table. And, you know, one of the complaints that we've had across the United States is that people from some states are very suspicious of the voting processes in other states. So, you know, one of our issues is how do you solve that problem? How do you restore faith in voting? Now, is there anything in this bill, in HR1, that you've seen that accommodation of a standard system across the United States would solve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Dodson, thank you for your question. In terms of voter unfamiliarity with other states is, I know one thing that our office throughout the 2020 election and even today, we continue to reiterate that every state has their own election administration and their own election laws. And just because it happens in one state, it may not happen in another. So I think the more that we can have elected officials and political parties and candidates reaffirming that, that would certainly be helpful. There are some provisions of the bill that could be useful. One provision I would know is that it would allow young adults under the age of 18 to pre-register to vote so that when they turn 18, their voter registration automatically becomes official. Kansas has similar policy provisions where if you're 17 years old, you can go ahead and fill out your voter registration form. So then that way, when you turn 18, you're automatically registered to vote. That's a provision that we could find helpful, particularly in engaging young adults and getting them registered to getting them involved in the process. So there are things, but the bill is so wide reaching that from an election administration standpoint, that's kind of our first priority right now in determining the election, the impact of the bill.
I appreciate that, and I'm a big proponent of local control. And so as we do things of our Kansas election system, I just want to make sure we're being respectful of people down in the counties that have to administrate these. So thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Committee, are there further questions for the proponents? Seeing none, thank you to the proponents for your testimony today on HCR 5015. We will now move to the opponents and neutral section. I have none listed here on my agenda in front of me. Are there any opponents or neutrals? Representative Miller.
Do you think, Mr. Chairman, it's possible we have no opponents simply because there was less than 24 hours notice of this item being on today's agenda? I have gotten emails already from people opposed to the bill. Do you think maybe the reason they didn't offer formal testimony was because of the lack of notice?
They had 24 hours notice, which is the policy and the rules as far as how much notice we need to give folks for hearings on such legislation. So I can understand what you're asking. However, there was 24 hours worth of notice, and so they did have the opportunity to submit their testimony.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not alleging a violation of the rules. It was within the rules, but typically when we get our agenda the week before, it lists what items we're going to take up the following week, and this was not listed as an item that we would be taking up until yesterday. But I know it's within the rules, and I'm not making that allegation. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Yes, you are correct. Last week, the agenda said that the meeting was on call of the chair, and the chair decided to call a meeting yesterday afternoon regarding this legislation. Thank you, Representative. All right. Seeing no opponents or neutrals at this time, both of those sections are closed, and I'm going to go ahead and close the hearing on HCR 5015. Committee, I will update you kind of on what I've seen and what we're looking at over the next few weeks. So we have completed turnaround. Turnaround happened this past week. We were off for a few days, and we received Senate bills, and the Senate received House bills. However, that being said, the Senate did not send us any elections bills. So at this point in time, you can expect to see HCR 5015 next Tuesday, most likely. And so that'll be on the agenda that's going to go out either today or tomorrow. I believe the current agenda says meeting on call of the chair, but I will let you know that we're doing HCR 5015 next Tuesday. So please review HR1 if you feel so inclined to review the national policy proposal. And then after that point, we are basically going to be at the mercy of the Senate and whether or not they send us any elections bills. So we're going to have about a 2-week period here before first adjournment. It's about 2 to 3 weeks roughly before first adjournment happens. And if we're not able to get a piece of legislation through the Senate over to us and be able to work and have hearings and that kind of stuff on whatever it is that they send us, there is a chance that we might not see any more elections bills. So it just really depends on what the Senate does over the next few weeks. So we will most likely have a lot of meetings on your calendars called the chair, but just try to be as flexible as possible. I'll try to let you know as soon as possible on if the Senate sends us something on a Wednesday or something like that. I will try to give you guys 24 hours notice before calling such a meeting. So with that, is there anything for the good of the committee? Representative Miller.
Just a rhetorical question for the revisor's office.
Go for it.
Were you ready, Mr. Long, to answer my question?
I love rhetorical questions.
Thank you.
All right. Is there anything else for the good of the committee? Representative Berquist.
From
From a legal standpoint, my wife has put up with me for 33 years today. Thank you.
Congratulations, Representative. Happy anniversary. All right, is there anything else for the good of the committee? Seeing none, we are adjourned.